A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us for the ISAS seminar titled Nepal's Public Finance and Social Security Programs. This seminar will provide an overview of Nepal's public finance and social security programs. It will focus primarily on Nepal's government revenue and social security expenditures. The event will also discuss Nepal's challenges in this area and the government's efforts to address the challenges in Nepal's outlook for the future. To speak on this today, we are delighted to have with us as guest speaker Dr. Ram Prasad Ghimire, Secretary, Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of Nepal. This session will be chaired by Dr. Pushpa Sharma, a visiting Senior Research Fellow here at the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS. Today's session will be live streamed on the ISAS Facebook page. I shall now invite Dr. Pushpa to commence the session, please.
Thank you, Swati. Thanks for coming, everyone. Welcome to this seminar. We'd also like to welcome our audiences who are joining us live on Facebook. As Swati also briefly introduced the seminar, this seminar is basically on part of Nepal's economy and the social security program. Now, when you talk about Nepal's economy, there are many things, of course, to discuss, and it's not possible to cover everything in one seminar of a 1-hour session. Perhaps we'll do that subsequently in other seminars. There are lots of things to discuss, but one of the very important things at the moment for Nepal is the rising social security expenditure, which is very important. The social security itself is very important, but with it also are the implications of those rising costs and the means of meeting those costs, and the challenges that Nepal has been facing at present. Lots of debate is also there at home about what we can do about it. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Ram Prasad Ghimire, the right person actually, who looks after the revenue bit, so to say, who leads the revenue bit at the Ministry of Finance. And interestingly, Dr. Ghimire was also at the Ministry of Labor earlier, and he was instrumental in kickstarting one of the new social security programs in the country called the Social Security Fund. So thank you, Dr. Ghimire, for joining us, despite your busy schedule, that you are here for some other things, but then you very gladly accepted our request. Thanks so much. So without further ado, I would invite Dr. Ghimire for your presentation. Perhaps we can go for about 40-45 minutes, and then we can then go for Q&A after that. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Pushpaji, for inviting me. To say a few words on Nepal's economy and social security systems. So as you rightly pointed out that in recent years, the expenditure on social security has been increased tremendously. So the root of that stems to the new constitutions. When we framed the new constitutions, we put the social security as a fundamental rights. So expenditure on social security, rise in expenditure in the social security, that stems from the very formulation of the constitution, new constitution of Nepal that was framed in 2015. So I have a few slides on that. So that I begin with highlighting Nepal's economy. So compared to neighboring countries, India and China, so Nepal is quite small. But if you compare to other countries in the world, so population is around 30 million, and GDP in terms of US dollar is 42.6 billion. GNI per capita is still very low. It's 1,456. So recently, Nepal had a high economic growth after the 2015 earthquake, because of the a lot of construction works took place in the country. So consequently, for the 3 years, Nepal achieved high growth. But after the COVID-19, as elsewhere in the world, it had a huge impact on Nepal's economy. So if you talk about the growth rate, it's 3.87. I think last week we concluded a staff level meeting with the IMF. So they have projected around 5% growth, 4.9% growth this year for this year. Looking at the external sector, the external sector, the indicators for the external sectors, they look, comfortable at the moment because of the huge inflow of remittance, as well as the, decrease in trade itself. So if you look at the Nepal's economic growth during the last decades, it's, a lot of ups and downs, and there was during 1920, it was negative growth for the first time in the history of Nepal. So gradually it went up, but again, because of the, global, supply chain disruption, it went down to 1.95, and now it's, so now the major economic indicators are gradually improving. However, economic growth is still, far below the, level of expectation. If you compare the, contribution of, different sectors, so contribution of social service sector has been constantly increasing in the in recent period, whereas contribution of agriculture sector is going down. Also, the industrial sector is also not that. So if you see, so I just wanted to show this, slide to explain you that in developing countries like Nepal, the government, they are very much keen to increase the size of the budget, but by the end of the day, they come up with a very low level of expenditure. So if you see the 11 months, expenditure, it's decreased by 6.3%, although the size of the budget was increased. Even the capital expenditure is decreased, so it has huge implication on revenue itself because of the decline in expenditure. However, financing has gone up, and if you see the revenue in terms of GDP in South Asian region, of course, it's not that low compared to other countries, but given the size of the economy itself, it's not big to finance the growing need for expenditure. So growing need for the expenditure to finance the social security, that as I stated earlier, that there are a number of social security schemes. They are already treated as a fundamental rights of the citizen. Also, because of the state of development, so there is a growing need to develop infrastructure. We need a lot of investment. So in light of that, so also so the decline in the capital expenditure has implication to generate domestic revenue. So consequently, as a matter, so the level of debt is going up, partly because of the interest rate. So in the past 2 years, interest rate was quite high in Nepal. So now it's going down. For that region too, specifically the domestic debt, size of the domestic debt, that increased tremendously. So if you see the trend of revenue and expenditure, as I told you earlier, that during the period when we achieved high growth, for 3 years, both the revenue and expenditure went up, but gradually, it became stable, and now, if you see the revenue for the last year, 22-23, it declined. Because partly because of the Nepal's revenue is by and large based on import, based on foreign trade. So foreign trade was declined because of the import restriction policy that the government adopted during that time, because of the fear that Nepal also will meet the fate of other countries, for instance, South Asia, Sri Lanka. because we were afraid that if we deplete the foreign exchange reserves, so we might be in trouble. For that reason, we imposed import restriction. There might be a number of arguments that whether or not we should impose import restriction at that time, and whether or not we should maintain the import restriction for quite a long time, because for that reason. So consequently, the revenue went down because the revenue is basically based on custom. So around 40% of the total revenue is generated from custom points, be it VAT, excise duties as well. So as I stated earlier, so trends of public debt has been increased tremendously in the recent period. After 2018-19, it is because of the a number of reasons. Partly because after, as I stated earlier, after in 2015 earthquake, we got loans from different sources. So partly because of that, and partly because of the low level of domestic revenue mobilization, and partly because of the increase in in bank rates. So increase in bank rates, it has huge implication for debt service payments. When we look at the composition of revenue, so the largest source of revenue in terms of sources is VAT, still 30%, and followed by income tax 25.4, and then customs 19.8 in total, non-tax just 9.8, and excise 14.7. This year, income and VAT, of course, they haven't reached to the level of previous previous years yield, but specifically the excise and customs, they are on decline. Consequently, this year, of course, we have a growth of around 10%, but it's still we had a huge target to meet in. So compared with the target, it's very low. So now let me come to the social security in Nepal. As I stated earlier, that social security in Nepal that roots back to 1934, when it was introduced only for the army. So before that, only after the government introduced it for the army, later on it was extended to civil service as well. So that was just the pension. But if you talk about the contribution based social security, it's very late, because there was a huge increase in pension expenditure, government's pension expenditure. But it was really difficult to implement contribution based social security. So if I remember correctly, we put it in 5 or 6 years budget speech that we are going to introduce contribution based social security scheme. But there were huge protests, and time and again the government had to postpone for the moment. And only after 2017 we introduced contribution based social security. So I talk here about the contribution based social security because with unless we rightly balance contribution based social security with the non-contributory funds, so the country cannot finance social security. For that reason, we introduce contribution based social security. So before 1990s, before 2017, it was just pension fund and provident fund type of social securities. Only after the 2015 constitution, so there was a provision, as I stated earlier, that provision of social security and social justice related rights as a fundamental rights in the article 34, article 42, and article 43 of the Constitution of Nepal. Uh, uh, Before that, of course, there were a few, mentioned in the periodic plans, but uh, the periodic plans, they didn't go much in implementing, contribution-based social security. And at present, if we see the overall, framework of the social security, there are different types of social securities. Altogether, I counted that there are 85, social security related programs. Of course, not all the direct social security, but if you see the social assistance and social protection, social insurance kind of thing, so there are 85 social security. So these, schemes has been proliferating, whereas the government's ability to generate domestic revenue has not, improved to that level. So for this reason, it is imperative that the more the government, goes for the contribution based social security, the less would be the, liability to the state. So if you see the legal frameworks and legal and institutional frameworks, there are a number of laws, there are a number of acts. So Labor Act 2074, it means 2018.
Yeah, I think it.
So by the time when I went to the Ministry of Labor and Employment and Social Security, there was just an act. There is no scheme at all. So there is no regulations, of course. So when I entered into the ministry, firstly we introduced regulations, and then it was really difficult to frame the schemes, because without actuary analysis, we didn't have that much human resources for actuary analysis. And one person from New Zealand, he came there and had an actuary analysis, and we introduced some schemes there. All other acts are just directly or indirectly just related to the basic law is Social Security Contribution Based Social Security Act. Another Social Security Act has to do with much more with the social protection and social assistance. This is Contribution Based Social Security Act is basically the act that provides framework for the contribution based social security. So that is applicable mostly to the private sector at the moment, and also the employees under contractual arrangements, they can also enroll to the contribution based social security. But currently, people, the employer, they are complaining that they have huge burden, because the employer has to contribute 20%, and the employee can contribute 10%, and altogether 30%. And before that, there was 1% social security tax that is still there. So altogether 31%. So the employer, they are time and again they are saying that it's a huge burden to the employer. Now, so far as the institutional provision is concerned, there is a social security fund that a separate entity was established. So when I was there, so we recruited human resources there, and we started it started functioning. There are some other institutions as well, like Employee Provident Fund, that looks after only about the pension, both contribution based as well as non-contributory. In the past, when I joined civil service, there was no contribution based scheme. But even in the civil service, now we have contribution based. We just started it, but the employees has to contribute 6%, and the government contributes 6%, altogether 12%. But I'm not sure whether it is sufficient, to finance that, because if you compare the pension for the non-contributory scheme, so it's quite, I think it doesn't meet. So we need to revise, or either we need to, the government need to finance more, or we need to, change the contribution, share of the contribution. There is another institution called Citizen Investment Trust. Basically, it was established to expand capital markets in the country, but it also, in the later stage, it also introduced some of the schemes. For example, people's pension scheme, and so people, they contribute. So after contributing for certain period, so they get the pension. So that is also a kind of social security conducted by Citizen Investment Fund. And we have also health insurance board. So basically, it covers the, of course, it's not per se insurance based. It is like like a grant or something like this. So it's not run as per the basic thrust of the insurance, because it's the government who has to contribute a lot. So people, they contribute. So in the past, we used to contribute just 1,500 or something. Now it is more than 3,000, more than 3,000 Nepali rupees, of course. But it is not run based on insurance. It is still, so we need to, because there is a huge risk of moral hazards here. People, they spend a lot. Even the hospitals, they bill a lot. It is often said that some of the hospitals, they are run only with the help of this health insurance board. So we need to look at it. We need to revise the policy, and to implement all these social security schemes. Now we have, from this year onwards, we need to produce a national ID. So there is a separate department called Department of National ID, so which is under the Ministry of Home Affairs. We call it Home Affairs. In other countries, it is Internal Affairs. In some other countries, if we see the social security budget, we can clearly see that there is a budget for the social security is galloping. In the last 10 years, so it was 8.17% of the total budget in 2013-14. Now in 2023-24, it is 14.78. It has gone up. Social security allowances has increased tremendously from 2.51% to 8.16%. Similarly, the pension and others, but the growth is not that sharp as the social security allowances. It's because social security and the political leaders, they this is the age of contagious populism. Everywhere in the world, people, they want to be popular. Specifically, the government, political parties, they want to be very popular, and every time they compete with each other to introduce new sort of social assistance program. Sometimes they want to increase the amount. For instance, if one party in the government, they provide 1,000 Nepalese rupees, other party come in the power, they want to provide 2,000, without considering the consequences of that, without considering the burden of that. So it's not, I guess it's not unique in the case of Nepal, in many other developing countries as well. But in our case also, when we introduced seniors, pension for the senior citizens, just 100 rupees in 1994-95. So for 8 years period, it remained constant, and after that, frequently it increased. Now it's more than it's now 5,000. From 100, it increased to 5,000 because the subsequent governments, they wanted to increase it. So if we see the social security in terms of total expenditure, so we discussed earlier about the budget. Now we see the similar trend in the expenditure side as well. So the government spent 2.99 percent of the total expenditure in 2012-13, whereas it increased to 8.21 in 2022-23. Pension and others, of course, that also increased, but not to that extent. Social assistance, that's also increased, but overall, uh, it increased, sharply. So the same data can be, presented here. So in the recent year, surprisingly, 2022-23, it went down. So partly because it is often partly because we introduced online system. So a number of the cases of moral hazards, they were eliminated recently. And in partly because some of the targeted programs, they were dropped off by the subsequent governments. So which were just based on the program itself rather than some scheme, continuous scheme. So the programmatic schemes were lifted. So for that reason, now it shows that it's reduced to some extent. So size of social security budget. So if you see in terms of GDP as well, so in terms of GDP, it was 0.58. Altogether, it was 1.89 in 2013-14, but now it reached to 4.54. If we compare with the other South Asian countries, compared to Sri Lanka, it's lower. Compared to Maldives, of course, so it's very difficult to compare with the Maldives economy. But if we compare to other countries, it is quite higher than other countries in South Asia. If we compare, social security expenditure, social security budget in terms of GDP, yeah, as a percentage of GDP, that there is a similar trend. I think I don't need to go much in detail here. So if you see the social security, if you compare social security expenses with federal expenditure and recurrent expenditure, so the average growth is much more than the federal expenditure or recurrent expenditure. The average growth for the last 10 years of federal expenditure is 15.4%. Recurrent expenditure is 15.5% higher than that. But if we see the total expenses on social security, it is 22.5%. It is quite higher compared to recurrent expenditure and federal expenditure. So there are a number of social security schemes like social security allowances to senior citizens, and even within the senior citizens, we changed the policies. So when we introduced the social security allowance for the senior citizens in 1994-95, it was 75 years the age, but later on it was reduced to 70 years. And again, another government came in power and he wanted to reduce it to 68, but they didn't consider the consequences. As a matter of fact, I think when we reduced 2 years from 70 to 68, it increased the liability for the government around 40 billion rupees per annum. So there are different types of schemes for the senior citizens as well. For instance, so 68 years is common to all. So for certain backward region, it is just 60. For instance, to the Karnali zone where there is a low level of development. and also for certain caste and ethnicities which are relatively least which are less which are not in the mainstream of the development process itself. So and there is a scheme for single women and single women for 60 years, and also the single women, but the amount is different. And for disabled people also, so completely disabled and disabled people, there are different schemes for them. There are a number of other pension schemes. Time that's it. Uh, 15 minutes. Okay. Yeah. So there are some other social actions. I will just dwell upon those schemes in the next slide, maybe. Health insurance scheme to all, free distribution of basic medicines also, because the government has a policy to provide 90 medicines free to the people. So that also costs, and free maternity services, 5,000 medical allowances for the treatment of deprived citizens, so to transplant kidneys to all kinds of cancers and other serious uh, illnesses, and free treatment to handicapped people, free immunization, free treatment. So there are a number of schemes related to health services. For senior citizens, 68 plus, they get 4,000. So if you compare in terms of dollar, it's not that big, but it's quite good for the people, specifically in the rural area. Senior citizens, Dalits and Karnali, 60 plus, they get 2,660. Single women 60 plus, 2,660. Widow women also have the same. Endangered indigenous ethnic citizens. So there is a list of endangered ethnicities. So they get 3,990. Fully disabled, completely disabled, 3,990. Partially disabled, slightly lower than that. And grants for the children as well. Grants for the children 532. There are also some other schemes. Grants for the children is universal, but there are some other schemes for the deprived communities, children from the deprived communities. So when we talk about the impact of social security, of course, it has a very good impact. So it improved human development index. So it improved a lot. If we look at in terms of social indicators, for instance, maternal mortality rate, it was 250 in 2011, but now it reduced to 151 2023. So almost all the social indicators like child mortality rate, infant mortality rate, and neonatal mortality rate, so they were reduced significantly. So that could be attributed to the introduction of social security. So because of the social security, there was a increasing access to basic health services, and as I said earlier, it's not, of course, fully based on insurance system, but people who never went to the hospital, they began to go to the hospital once we introduced this health insurance board in the country. So that I think that has a positive impact in increasing access to health services. And also there were improvements in education related indicators like literacy rate, and student enrollment rate, net enrollment rate, as well as the entrance rate, they were increased. So mean years of schooling was also improved. But if you compare to it with the developed countries, so it's not that significant. But if you compare, from the baseline, so there is a significant improvement in that. So it also helped to reduce poverty, and some of the studies they show that so spending on social security is not spending; it is an investment. Further, if you spend 1 rupees in social security, the study shows that you get 2.56, rupees, in terms of GDP. So I think the implementation of social security schemes that also contributed in reducing the level of people below the poverty line. So it also obviously it was also supportive to pursue a policy of inclusive development, specifically increasing participation of female, Madhesi, Dalit communities who were deprived, all the deprived communities, and share of the women in public service also increased. So when we introduced inclusive civil service, I think it was I was with the Ministry of General Election during that time. We are a bit confused how to determine the different percentage for different, how much for the women. So we I remember that we commissioned a very small study, and based on that study, so we determined the percentage for different for women, for Dalits, other deprived communities, other geographical locations, So that is still working now. So partly because of that, policy, and partly because of the social security policy. So today, if you see the health sector, so around 50%, health personnel are women. 49 point something, so around 50%. Overall, also it has improved. By the time we introduced it, it was in 2006, I guess. In 2006, it was just women's participation in civil service was just 8%. But now, it's about 1/3 of the civil servants are women. And if we look at the health and education, that is quite good. Of course, there are some other implications as well, as we discussed earlier. There is a huge pressure on public in the past, despite all these positive impacts. And also, there is an increasing demand for making universal coverage of social security. Of course, it is there in the constitution. The state is liable to make provision for to implement the provisions of the enshrined in the constitution itself. So now, I just highlight on some of the major issues of social security, and I stop here for discussion. So there is a rapid rise. So demography has changed these days. Of course, at the moment we have a democratic dividend, what we call. So we have a working age population is quite big till now, but the trend has changed. So now 68 plus population rose from 3.77%. So it was in census 2011, but now it is 5.23. So aging population, we are heading towards the aging society. Growth rate also declined, and there is a huge challenge to manage public expenditure for social security, because we need to generate resources not only for the social security but also to develop infrastructure, because given the level of infrastructure development in the country, also we need to we need a lot of money to finance SDGs. So for that reason too, it's very challenging to manage social. In the meantime, there is a new trend has come in terms of revenue as well. So as we discussed earlier, custom points is one of the major sources of revenue. But the major items are vehicles from combustible engines and diesel, petrols. These are among the top revenue generating items. But now, along with the introduction of electronic vehicles in the country, it has been challenging. So this year alone, I guess we about 36 billion rupees equivalent revenue was foregone because of the electric vehicles. If the same vehicles of combustible engine were imported, so that would be the revenue. So it doesn't mean that we are not in favor of the electric vehicles, but the thing is that we should have considered the sequencing of reforms. So we compare when we compare with other countries, other countries they reduce the rate gradually, but Nepal we we reduced it at once. So if you see the case of Denmark, they took about 25 years that we did in a year or in a couple of years time. So that's how we, the developing countries, we failed to sequence reforms. Additional and alternative resources of financing, that's obvious. And another challenge is that there are a number of social security schemes proliferated in the country. So we need to integrate them so that there is no duplication. There are not similar social security schemes can be integrated. And when now we are in the federal system of government, not only the political parties in the government, they compete to increase the social securities in terms of social allowances and those things, rather than insurances. So also the provincial governments, they also compete with each other. Sometimes they introduce that different very strange schemes as well. So all the governments, even the local bodies, they compete with each other that to introduce news. Of course, it's not it's not bad, but that has to be sustainable. So that we need to consider the fiscal space that we have before we introduce new schemes. Another challenge is to bring in informal sector and self-employed people. So when we introduced contribution-based social security scheme, initially it was only the from the formal sector we could enroll there in the social security fund. But last year we just started enrolling informal sectors employees, but that is still challenging. Informal sector, there is no guarantee of income, and also self-employed people. So that is another challenge, that unless we bring in the people from informal sector, a sizable population will be left out. So for that reason, we need to consider that, but that is still challenging. And we also need to review social security allowances to integrate them and broadening the purview of social security tax. So this year, when while we are formulating the budget, we are thinking to introduce some social security tax, because in other countries where they have social security schemes, so they obviously have some taxes. But we had a discussion, but we could not come into consensus to introduce social security tax. And also we need to review social security related regulations and policies. And we need to include some self-employed people. So that is also challenging, in the scheme. So then obviously there might be a question, what next? I think unless we increase the pie of contribution-based social security, so we'll be in trouble. The government will be in trouble. It would be always a great challenge in front of us to manage public expenditure to generate internal revenue. Also, we need to form a consensus among the different tiers of the government. So they need to coordinate each other before they introduce, social security schemes. So, because there are similar schemes, throughout different tiers of the government. So that has to be, I think, and also that uh, we need to enhance our ability to generate revenue. We need to look at different, so we need to, of course, we cannot increase the tax rate. We cannot increase the burden. We need to, widen the base. We need to be very innovative, and in the meantime, we should be very realistic as well. So maybe some sort of social security taxes and other taxes related to luxury items and those things that can. So we need to adopt multi-pronged strategy. We cannot address the issues from expenditure front alone. We need to consider revenue side as well, and also we need to consider foreign aid management. We need to enhance efficiency in foreign aid management, because currently the disbursement rate is quite low, so we need to improve implementation of development projects. So altogether, I think that will ease out the problem of galloping social security in the country. So I stop here. And I would be pleased to furnish answers if you have any queries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gimre. I think that was quite a comprehensive overview of the revenue and social security programs in Nepal. I hope there are questions. I do have a few. If anyone from the floor has any question, I'm like a question ready. Perhaps we can go with that, and then I can ask my question later. Yeah, Ronojoy and Renik, perhaps we can collect a few.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gimre, for a very comprehensive presentation. I'll just focus on the social security bit. I may have missed out some aspect of your presentation, but when you mentioned social security of 30%, 20 and 10, and then another 1%, what are the users of this social security fund? For the individual. For example, in Singapore, we have something similar, and it's called the Central Provident Fund, which can be used for purchasing of houses, property, health, as well as investment. Right. So, what would be the purpose of that fund? Because you also have a health insurance that covers the society at large. So that's the first question I have. The second one is, there's so many different levels and different schemes that you have. How do you manage such a huge number of schemes, and which keeps changing, with almost every change of government? Thank you.
Yeah. So it's interesting that social security is a fundamental right in the new Nepalese constitution. I do believe that none of the other South Asian countries, definitely not India, social security is not a fundamental right. So that's an interesting. Could you sort of comment on how this came into being? And the second is, you mentioned a lot of categories that are eligible for financial benefits, including the elderly, the widowed, single women. So is that a universal right for all Nepali citizens, or is it pegged to some kind of economic indicators? Are people below a certain income level eligible for it, or is it for all citizens? Thank you. Thank you so much. So far as the use of bond is concerned, so As I mentioned you earlier, that Social Security Fund is relatively new, so they are looking the avenues to invest. But Employee Provident Fund, that's relatively older than that. So they invest money on basically on hydropower projects. So that's relatively secure project. And in some cases, they also invest on some of the infrastructure development projects run by the government themselves, uh, and they invest a little bit amount on national saving certificates or government bonds, those things. Uh, but as far as what is the use of health insurance? Because Social Security Fund itself, there is a scheme related to health. Sure, that's a pertinent and good question. So that's why I say that we need to we need to adopt an integrative approach. At the moment, people from different private companies, they are enrolled there, so they don't get health services from different uh, schemes. So for that reason, we need to integrate those things. Uh, And as far as the huge number, of course, it's very challenging. There is a huge number of schemes, and as you rightly pointed out, that there are different schemes. Some of the schemes are universal, and some of the schemes are, perpetual in nature, and some of the schemes are, based on some economic indicators. For instance, at the moment. There are 20 people from the 20 districts. They get certain social security schemes, not other districts, because these districts falls on on certain parameters for that reason. So there are mix of the social security schemes. So the social security schemes that are based on certain parameters, they are easy to abandon, or easy to close it down. But other perpetual nature, for example, for instance, old age pensions, senior citizens pensions, you cannot stop them. So there are different types of, and so far as the fundamental right is concerned, we really had a very arduous process of constitution formulation, constitution making. It took quite a long. So both these, there was a huge debate, discussion, dialogue, whatever we say, among different state and non-state actors. So this is an outcome of of so they did rather than looking at the implementability analysis, they wanted to come into consensus. So this, so when coming into the consensus, so that's how we framed it. For that reason too. So some of the it is very difficult to, of course, to implement, but they are there in the constitution, because the constitution itself is an outcome of consensus among different state, non-state, and other actors as well. Because it took decades, arduous process. So there was a political change in 2006. We got constitution on 2015. Thank you. Thank you.
How easy is it? How easy is it for the people to tap on the security grants? Because there are now many types of grants you have now given. How easy is it for the people to tap on the grants? That will be the first one. Number two, of course, now how many people, or say now what is the percentage of the people there which are in the tax bracket? When we are talking of the revenue, how many people are there in the tax bracket? Or say, is it a particular group only which is paying the taxes, or there are, or the no KTG is generally with this white bracket is there? And third one is like it is as the competition is good for that, giving the new facilities whenever the new government comes or when new it is given, but it has to be on the sustainable way, that it will not be draining the pocket for no, okay, there is no income source, and then if you grant that, then it will be very difficult to meet it. And since we are talking on the taxation also, now I had one question. Do we have any double taxation agreement with Singapore, or is government of Nepal planning for that anything in near future? Thank you.
So shall I respond? So yeah, you really had a very good question, sir. I think the first one has to do with administrative process, how people, um, whether or not they have easy access to the social security they are entitled for. So now, people, they get their social security recently. So they get their social security through their bank accounts. So, but still there are some places where people, they don't open bank account. So people who are having bank account, they can easily, the amount can be easily transferred to them. And so now it is integrated with, national ID. So, so from this year onwards, it was made compulsory, but I don't know to what extent, we'll be able to distribute, ID to all citizens. Otherwise, there will be but so in the past there was moral hazards both on the part of the recipient as well. In some cases, people you know continue to get social security, of course, even when they are not there. But now, since it is integrated in an online system, so that has saved some. So that has saved some efficiency gains from that. So it is still difficult in some of the remote districts. There is one village development committee that doesn't have bank branches throughout the country. Out of the 753 village development committees, there is one village development committee that doesn't have any commercial branches, banks branches. So otherwise, other in other BDCs, if they open the bank account, so that can be easily transferred. And this is the area which has been improved a lot. So for instance, today in the evening, so I can tell how much was spent, how much was collected throughout the day. So so far as tax bracket is concerned, yes, a number of people, they are not. So for instance, a study carried out recently by the central bank itself, it showed that informality is around 40% in the country. So obviously there are very few people paying taxes. And as far as yeah, we of course we need to be mindful. We need to look at the pause. We need to look at the possibility of revenue generation when we change or introduce new social security schemes. So technically, we in the bureaucracy, we we come up with some technical analysis and we suggest them, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, because budget is not only a technical document, it is also a political document. That's how we are go. So far as the double taxation is concerned, I think we have just double taxation agreement with 11 countries so far. And for some countries where so we have a tax credit system. So if other countries, they have also tax credit system, so there is no need of double taxation agreement, because we manage it by taking credit. So for instance, last time when we had we requested the US government for DTA. So they replied that you also have credit system. We also have. We don't need double taxation agreement at the moment. That's how. So I think at the moment we do not have DTA with Singapore, I guess, but we are not hesitant to have DTA. So our uh, both industrial policy, it also allows DTAs, recently formulated industrial policy as well.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Yeah, please.
Thank you for the talk. My first question is regarding the formalization of the shadow economy. Have there been any studies that have taken place within the Nepali context to identify the main barriers for informal businesses to enter the formal economy? What are the main pain points, for instance? So if I was somebody running an informal business, why do I not want to formalize myself, I guess, and what kinds of policies is the government putting in place to remove those barriers or perhaps make the process more smoother? The second question is about the widening of the tax base. I'm not super sure about the statistics, but I just wanted to get a sense of whether the government is considering widening the tax base by allowing older populations to participate in the formal economy even after the retirement threshold of about 67, for instance. So if somebody wants to continue holding a job, maybe part-time, are there any provisions for that to take place? I asked this question also in the context of Singapore's economy, where the government seems to be actively taking steps to make sure that older populations can continue to participate by reskilling or by introducing re-employment programs. So having similar aging society problems, I wanted to get a sense of sort of what your thoughts on that might be. Thank you.
So thank you for a question related to widening the tax base. So I think we need to consider that last year's, but in the meantime we need to provide some sort of stability in taxes and policy. Last year we introduced a number of new taxes, for instance luxury taxes. We also introduced foreign employment taxes, because since, as I stated earlier, since the trend of revenue generation, for instance, revenue generation from combustible engines has decreased significantly. We need to think over some other sources of so for that we need to broaden our tax base. So far as the informal economy is concerned, so informal and informal and shadow economy, they are not necessarily, I guess they are not necessarily the same. So for example, it's not the underground economy necessarily. Underground informal economy is, as you rightly pointed out, that people might be hesitant to get themselves formalized, thinking that they might be trapped when now they have some income, but by the end of the day they might not have some income as well to pay the taxes. So there might be some sort of fearful psychosis. So I think we need to inform them well. We need to assure them well that the government will not put you in trouble when you don't have income. So whenever you have income, only in that cases you need to. So that has to be established among the general public, and also that there might be some. For instance, some people might want to come under the domain of formal sector, but they have a link with some other home-based activities. So since they are not able to bring in other their networks within the domain of formal sector, they might be a bit hesitant. So we need to have a very comprehensive analysis on that. So that's the need of the hour, that we need to formalize it, so that there might be different continuum. So maybe first we bring in to semi-formal type of then so we might be thinking to provide some sort of incentives to bring in within the, once they are within the net. So whenever they have some income, they contribute a small amount of it to the country. So far as the working age, yes, it is interesting to note that Singapore has been increasing the working age. For instance, now they have increased to 63. So if you want to again work, you can work after 68, I guess.
65 now.
65. Yeah. They are pushing to 67. But unfortunately, in our case, there are two different systems. One is 30 years of service. So people is in 50s, they get retired. And another is 58. So we have submitted a bill to the Parliament for a Civil Service Act, so Civil Service Bill. So there we have proposed 60. But since the life expectancy has gone up, so I think it's sensible to, and also if we consider the a burden, financial burden to the state, so early age retirement is burdensome compared to the, and also that the people when they are able to work, they should be allowed to work so long as they are able to. So but in reality, we have these two. So in some of the banks, for instance, central bank, they get retired in. So they start, service 18 or 20, and then after 30 years below, they get retired well below the 50. They have a lot of energy, but so we haven't been able to, since there are different interest groups, so we haven't been able to to correct the system.
Thank you. I think with the retirement is perhaps the dilemma for Nepal is also that we are having a demographic divide at the moment, and when there aren't many employment opportunities, perhaps you want to have some people retire to make space for the younger ones.
But that's a very small fraction, less than 1%.
I think Nasir has a question.
Thank you so much for the talk. I'm Nasir. I'm also from Nepal. So like on a real basis, what I see Nepal is like we are far way behind in terms of economic growth. And so as a revenue officer, what are the challenges you see like next 5 year Nepal will face in terms of revenue generations? Like you said that custom is one of the big player in terms of revenue generation as well as remittance also. So what I feel is that we don't have any central system. Let everybody be connected with the revenue system. And my final question will be, where do we lie? Like, why not Nepal be able to represent itself as a like big economic player in terms of like growth in overall Asia? Why like the outsiders think that Nepal is small and the poor country? So how come like as a revenue officer, how come you think that we come out from this broad negative thinking?
Oh, thank you for $1 million question. Of course, I think we need to look at from different perspective. From one perspective, you see that so we were able to survive even during the very unfavorable situation. For instance, all other countries in the world, they faced COVID-19. They also, many of them also, faced, global supply chain disruptions, of course, varied in degrees. But other countries, they didn't face like the devastating earthquake we did. We had to face in 2015. So 2015 devastating earthquake, 2019 again COVID-19, and then global supply chain disruption. So I think we should consider that we are resilient. So people were afraid of having same fate as Sri Lanka did. Sri Lanka had some problems during that period, but we survived. So survival itself is during the hard time. So I think we should not think that low compared. But the matter of fact that we started very late for development. For instance, when Nepal, we had a democracy in 1950. Can you imagine what was the literacy rate? Literacy rate was just 4%. Literacy rate only. It's not the well-educated people. Just 4%. So it has been increased, but it doesn't mean that we should live on the level that we have today. So I think the basics of the infrastructure has been built. For instance, the country is connected because being a landlocked country is a great challenge for infrastructure development. It's not that easy to and also that we are not able to to implement a resettlement plan. For instance, there is one peak. At the top of the peak there is one house. You have to take electricity, you have to take road connection, you have to take other services as well. That's a big challenge. But now almost the whole country is connected by road at the moment. So if you have so originally I'm from very in western part of Nepal, rural area. So in the place where we never thought that there would be a road, now that is blacktop road there. So there are some some indications that to build on hopes on that but still I think we haven't been able to do so, partly because of the geographical difficulties, partly because we could not flourish our industrial development because we are within in between two giant countries. We should have made them our markets, but we are being their markets, and there are similarity of products. So there are very few areas of competitive advantage. So we need to look at something that is competitive, that has competitive advantage with them. For instance, herbal products. So that and tourism, hydropower. So we have done very well in terms. If you see the hydropower development in Nepal. So recently, when we participated private sector, the production has gone up. So we have started, exporting it to India, and we had an MOU with Bangladesh as well through India. They have agreed to import some electricity. So we have a tremendous hydropower potential. So we need to focus on what we have, rather than doing whatever other countries are doing, rather than copying it. So of course, as you rightly told that we are still low income country, but there are a number of regions that we should not think that low. And also we have to be always optimistic, given all the circumstances here, given all the political economy there, political instability and other things. So, but the new breeds has come up, So obviously there will be so the situation will not be there after 10 years, 5-10 years. So I think all the basics has been in place. Now we have to take up. We are at the take up stage, I think. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gimri. I think we have a few more minutes. Perhaps I'll come back to two of my questions of the many. Perhaps we can discuss the others later maybe. One is related in terms of the universal and targeted. Of course, there are so many of the schemes and many of them are targeted. But one of them, the old age allowance, I think is the universal one. And looking at the figures, pension scheme perhaps might not be that much of a problem now, because now we have the contribution based, and over the years that will help, right? And even in case of the growth that we have seen in the pension schemes, it is not that high. But where the growth has come from, where the expense growth has come from, is from the social security allowance. Perhaps the old age one is the biggest contributor over there. And of course, when something comes free, everyone takes it. So even people who are very well off, for them like 4,000 rupees a month, that is $40 Singapore dollars a month, is peanuts, but still they access that, right? So I think there is also a discussion going on about whether we have to make that target. Is it possible to reverse that and then make it targeted? And will that be easier for Nepal to administer? Because there is also a debate globally whether, in terms of these kinds of schemes, universal is better because of the administrative costs involved in targeted ones. So that would be one. The second one would be in terms of revisiting the social security tax. And there was a study that a commission had perhaps submitted, and there was a news today. Actually, I was looking at this Pismandu, the online news portal, which has carried a story about the revisiting of the social security tax. Because the tax bracket itself, people in the tax bracket itself is very small. And if there is a revision of the social security tax, do you think there will be a backlash again? Because it will be a burden on the same people who have been contributing, unless we are able to expand that base by including more people into it. So how is the government going about revisiting the social security tax? So these two quick questions.
Thank you. With regard to the universal and targeted one, I think we need to go for social insurance rather than social allowance. We need to emphasize on that. But still, there are some instances where we need some social allowances to bring the people to the mainstream of development. So we have to design the schemes so that whenever the criteria are met, so we can move forward. We can lift the scheme. So that's how we need to, I think, design. So based on certain criteria. For instance, currently there are 20 districts. So the districts might be reduced to 15 gradually. So that's one way of, the social security design itself can address the issue. Another, within the universal itself, there are some criteria, as I said. For instance, for the people more than 68 years age, that's universal to everybody. But for the people in Karnali, if they cross 60, they are entitled to get, yes, that allowances. So, but that is, I think that is really difficult to revert back. Of course, that is criteria based, but it's still, like universal nature, so all the people they get. So that might be difficult, but other targeted programs. So if we design well, so that might not be that difficult. So far as the revision of social security tax is concerned, I think when we were formulating budget this year's budget, so we were thinking that we should introduce some social security tax, and also we had a high level committee that recommended social security tax. So still we had a debate with political leaders. So this is not the right time that we introduce social security tax. Why in this government? Why not next government or something like that? So it's not that easy to convince them sometimes. But that's the way we need to go, I think. And with the another matter of fact is that the court is also not supportive. We had several cases, that even the 5% tax income, on social security when they gave lump sum amount. So that is also ruled out by the court.
Perhaps everything boils down to politics. We have it in the constitution, and the court says it's in the constitution. You have to do it, maybe. But I think it was a very interesting talk, interesting discussion. Thank you all for joining and participating in the discussion. Thanks to our online audience as well. And thank you so much for coming and then enlightening us. Perhaps this discussion will keep going. And with this, I think we'll have a close of this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.